Hello and welcome to our listeners and viewers around the world to the Enlightenment podcast. We have lots to talk about as filmmakers that some of you know from the films behind me. But at this time in particular, we really wanted to start this to have a dialogue about Palestine, a dialogue that exists outside what we're seeing on mainstream media. Now, the majority of people that we've talked to don't know as much as they want to do about the history or the background of Palestine, or are finding it complicated. So this podcast is really all about creating a dialogue, building awareness, and reaching as many people as possible. And we thought we'd start out our first one with just a short introduction to Hanan, particularly my wife, my producer, and also a Palestinian. So Hanan, without further ado, let me just jump in and say, can you start by giving us a little bit of background about you, your heritage, and who you are?
Thanks, Reem. So I'm an entrepreneur and a film producer, and I produce your work, Shamim, that you write and direct based on your novels or scripts that you create. And we're very much focused on stories with female protagonists, women of color, diversity, LGBTQ stories. But really, the main thing is focusing on humanism, diversity, and inclusion. And from the 5 films we've done, with one being a feature documentary, 3 have focused on Palestinian stories and characters, mainly Palestinians in diaspora and everyday lives that you tend to not see very much on screen because we feel stories matter and representation really matters.
Yeah, I mean, we both know that, and we notice that Arabs in general and Palestinians in particular, on film and on our TV screens, are generally shown as the dispossessed or as terrorists. There's not much nuance in that narrative or representation. So that's a bit about what you do. But tell me about your family history. What's your background?
Yeah, so my father's from Bethlehem, a Catholic Palestinian, and my mother is from Jerusalem, who was brought up as Greek Orthodox. And they had a home in Haifa where she was born. So I was brought up as a Christian Palestinian in
Yeah,
diaspora.
so so let me jump in and say that I have to admit, embarrassingly, when we met, what, 3 decades ago, I wasn't even aware they were Christian Palestinians. I know it's a minority, and I just I had no idea. So just tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, you'll be forgiven, Shamim. This was
Thank you.
28 years ago, but that's fine. So very few people actually seem to know that Palestinians are Muslims, Christians, Jews, Druze, who lived and coexisted in Palestine for centuries. And, I'm not a historian, but just kind of to give you a bit of background, Palestinians come from a very ancient civilization. Historic Palestine was from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, often referred to in biblical terms as the land of milk and honey, because the soil is very rich and fertile. So despite the propaganda that people hear in the West, that Palestine was a land without a people for a people without a land, and we can talk about this, Shamim, in more details in other episodes. But Palestine, or Palestine, as we call it, has been at a crossroads for religion, culture, commerce. It's a name that's been around since probably the 5th century BC.
Yeah.
So it's very much the area.
Yeah. And as you say, that area has been, I mean, it's been under different rule. There have been the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, there have been Ottoman conquests. So Palestine has been controlled by different political empires over various centuries. But the Palestinian population itself, the indigenous population, has never really altered that much. Can you tell us more about that?
Exactly. Palestinians represent a highly homogeneous community who share one culture and one ethnic identity and speak Palestinian Arabic. So in Palestine, you don't find a population migration like in many other cultures, or very little, that altered the genetic makeup of the native Palestinian population. And regardless of the religious affiliations, Palestinians self-identify as the indigenous Palestinians of the land, and around 87% or so of their ancestry derives from the Bronze Age Levantines. So it hasn't changed much.
Yeah. When we did, as a family, we all did our kind of 23andMe DNA tests, and we thought exciting things were going to be shown up. With yours, actually, it showed that you were 99.9% from that area that is now Palestine.
Yes, just like you were a 19, yeah, exactly. Like you were 99.9 Gujarati Shami, but there you go.
Yes, indeed.
But, but a lot of people don't realize that Jesus was an indigenous Palestinian. He was born as a Palestinian Jew under the Roman Empire. And unlike how Hollywood depicts him as blonde, blue-eyed, etc., he probably looked like me with my skin color, curly hair, and like most Palestinians. So today, as Palestinians are being killed, it's the same people that Jesus belonged to, which is really tragic.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it. Tell me the Nakba in Palestine, 1948, when Palestine was lost for so many people. How did that impact your parents? Because they were alive at that time. They were young kids, probably 10 years old or thereabouts.
Yeah, very much so. My father and his siblings were in boarding school in Jerusalem. And
During that time in 1948?
during that time in
Yeah.
48, yes, when Nakba happened, they ended up having to move to Lebanon to boarding school. And my mom was around 8. And she and her family and siblings, her brothers, they couldn't go back to their home and their villa in West Jerusalem. So she also ended up in boarding school in Lebanon.
So overnight, they weren't allowed to go back to their own homes, put into strange schools and strange places. Never mind what the parents were going through. But your uncles did go back to that house in Jerusalem, correct? Can you tell us that story?
Yes, correct. So it was very traumatic. My uncles, when they were older with other passports, obviously they could go back to visit. They located their villa in West Jerusalem. They knocked at the door. There was an older German Jewish couple, and they said, yes, we moved in and took over. We didn't change anything, except for the renovation for the bathroom and the kitchen, but everything else, furniture, etc., is all exactly as it was. So, i.e., their home, their furniture, their belongings. So they were very, very traumatized and sad and cried and were very unhappy about it, as you can imagine, and felt really frustrated and that not only did they lose everything, but that it was still as it was when they had to leave.
Yeah, because it's an overnight thing. It's not like, oh, here's your eviction notice. You've got a year or a month or something like that. It's literally, like you said, the same furniture. The food is still warm on the stove in some cases, and it is a trauma that's not really talked about very much in the West, I think.
Yes,
It's
very
just
much so.
taken as a given. But on a more positive note, your family has had some really interesting contributions to Palestine in various ways, and as human beings. What about can you just tell us a little bit about maybe the older generation to start with?
Yes, so I'll start with Auntie Juju or Julia Katan. She's my paternal grandmother's youngest sister. They were very close, and
Grandfather, sister.
sorry, grandfather's
I know
sister.
that. I know Auntie Juju. I knew
Auntie Juju. We had
Yes,
the very lovely picnic in Bethlehem.
amazing in Bethlehem.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes, the only picnic I've been to with that much amazing, the grapevine leaves, the hummus, everything fresh and homemade. It certainly was not like a British picnic. But
No,
anyway, so back
yeah.
to Auntie Juju. Sorry, your grandfather's younger
No,
sister.
yeah, absolutely. So she founded a museum in the heart of Bethlehem, in the old city, called Baytun al-Talhami. That means our Bethlehem home. She was very, very active and kept it going for many years. And she was one of the first to start a museum. Then her brother, my grandfather, Tawfiq Kattan, was a member of parliament in Bethlehem, and his grandfather, Musa Kattan, my great grandfather, was the mayor of Bethlehem. Um, and also one of my great grandfathers on my grandmother's side, also a Kattan, was a prominent judge in Bethlehem. So a lot of ties to Palestine and Bethlehem from the older generation, certainly.
It's home for generations upon generations. And speaking of that, tell us about the younger generations, people our age and below. What have they been up to? There's some very artistic, interesting people around.
There are, and I'm very proud of all my cousins and all my relatives who are really amazing. I can start with my cousin Victor Kattan, who's a lawyer and an author. He specializes in international law. He's an activist through his many published books on Palestine, his lectures and talks and interviews. He's also helping with the ICJ and ICC. And then we moved to Fadi Kattan, another cousin who's a very talented chef and restaurateur. he celebrates our Palestinian heritage and culture through food. And his new wonderful book called Bethlehem is full of stories and recipes and family stories of growing up in Bethlehem. And they're really very beautiful. So anyone who hasn't seen it should get it as well. Kareem, his brother, is a novelist who features Palestinian characters, and he's also very talented. And Muna, my cousin from Bethlehem, is an educator. And it's very important for our Palestinian culture to keep the education going. So she's very active with young children and helping educate and enlighten as well. I also have cousins, two brothers, Ilyas and Yusuf Anastas in Bethlehem. They're brilliant and very talented architects and designers, and they support local Palestinian artisans through all their works. On the film side, I have Anne-Marie Jasser, who is also my cousin, and she's an award-winning filmmaker. She sets a lot of her stories in Palestine. She writes, directs, and produces, and very talented. You should see her films. And her sister, Emily, is a very talented Palestinian artist. And on the young generation, we have my niece, Jana Kattan, also contributes to Palestine and has written and produced a beautiful award-winning animation short called Checkpoint. And on my mom's side, I forgot, sorry, on the older generation, there's Samia Halabi, a very well-known artist. Her work is at the Guggenheim, and she's very vocal and a big supporter of Palestine. So from both sides of the family, basically.
Okay, well, great. I think we achieved our aim there of giving a little bit of Palestinian representation outside the norm. I think that's a really just an exciting range just within your family. So we leave it there maybe, and we say that we come back very soon, next week. I would hesitate. I hasten to say next week to better understand a little bit more in a different aspect of history. I think our next episode we're planning to cover Zionism. So come on in for that. If you have any ideas for topics or questions that you want us to answer or cover, just leave a little note for us on the comments wherever you're hearing or seeing this. And if you enjoyed this talk, please subscribe and please share that link with your friends and family. Our aim for doing this is to really get to as wide an audience as possible, discuss things from the perspective of somebody who is Palestinian, whose family has experienced life and living in Palestine. And with your support, we can do that.
Yeah, and just to say also, thank you for taking the time to watch and listen. Please subscribe and share. And thank you in advance for all your contribution.